During the first week of class, I let you put the camera on automatic for your first pictures. And since then, I've insisted that you do everything manual. Manual ISO, manual shutter speed, manual f-stop. And there are reasons for that. You know the reasons for that. It gives you control of your depth of field. It gives you control of your motion blur. It gives you control artistically of what you're doing. Well, that's fine, well and good, but what if you don't have time to spend 20 or 30 seconds dialing your exposure in? That's a very real concern. There are times when you're going to have to rely on the automatics, but just because of the situation that you're in, because you can't react quickly enough, because of the pressures of the shoot, there's going to be some time you have to rely on automatics. But wouldn't it be nice, wouldn't it just be wonderful if you didn't have to rely completely on automatics, if you could keep control of something? And guess what? You can. So when the camera was on automatic, it's controlling everything. It's controlling your f-stop, it's controlling your shutter speed, and it's controlling your ISO. But it doesn't have to be that way. So the little knob up top here where we went between automatic and manual, you probably noticed there are a lot of other settings there. And we're not going to talk about most of them, but there are 3 other ones that I do want to talk about. So rather than going to full manual, which is there as you know, all right, so full manual, you're used to that. You're used to what that entails. You're working with your own control of the shutter speed, of the iris, and of the ISO. If I move it one over, though, we go to A, and what A stands for in this case is aperture. So what will happen in aperture mode is as I turn my adjustment wheel, it will adjust the the aperture. So right now I'm shooting at f5.6. But the shutter speed is on automatic. So you'll notice as I pan the camera around, if you look at the menu here, you can see that the shutter speed is changing. The aperture's not changing. The ISO is not changing. Only the shutter speed is changing. So if you're wanting to keep control of your depth of field, you want to shoot at f16, right? You can set this on A for aperture priority. You can set it to f16, and then the camera will adjust the shutter speed for you so you get a proper exposure. So again, maybe you're shooting a race and people are, as they're running by, are coming through the shade and into the sunlight, and it's a constantly changing situation. You don't have time to adjust it, but you want that depth of field. Aperture priority is your friend for that. Now, having said that, the next step on our little dial here, S, is shutter speed priority. And shutter speed priority does, you might intuit, the same thing that aperture does, except it prioritizes the shutter speed. So as I turn my little turny dial here, it's going to change my shutter speed. So I'm going to set my shutter speed to 1/30th of a second here. Now watch as I move the camera around, as it's pointing at different parts of the room, you'll see that the aperture is what's changing. So the shutter speed is locked at 1/30th, the ISO is locked at an 800, but the camera automatic is running the aperture for me. So again, if motion blur is what I'm interested in, I want motion blur, I don't want motion blur, whatever, it's important to me that every frame be shot at 1/30th of a second. But it's a volatile situation where I don't have time to be sitting there making the adjustments myself. Shutter priority will allow the camera to run the aperture for me. And then this third one, and honestly, I don't get much use out of this one. When you switch it to the programmed auto, it allows the camera the freedom to do both the shutter speed and the aperture, but not touch the ISO. And if I turn the little dial, you'll see that it actually is making changes to both the shutter speed and the aperture, keeping it at an equivalent exposure. But as I pan around the room, you can see that both the aperture and the shutter speed are changing, but the ISO is static. So in a case where you want the camera to be mostly automatic, but you just don't want it messing with the ISO, because these cameras love to go to really high ISOs when they don't need to, and it introduces video noise. That's what that program switch is for. So given the opportunity, my preference is always to run full manuals, but that's just not reality. There are times when you need the camera to do some of the lifting for you. It's faster than you are. I'm not going to say it's better than you are, but it's faster than you are. But you can still keep some control by using the aperture priority if your f-stop is what's important to you, by using the shutter speed priority if shutter speed is what's important to you, or even by using this program, which is almost full auto, but at least you can keep it from mucking about with the ISO.